the first 3 points I think you issued, but can I just make a preliminary point? I think this is very, very important. The tickets were all sold before that substantive telephone conversation where I indicated my support. So at that stage, if I had said I'm totally opposed to this concert, there was a huge problem. So just to be clear about that, and I think Mr. Keogan will deal with all the contact we have. But just on the particular point in point 6 of Mr. Aiken's submission, the fact is that I got a phone call out of the blue on the evening of the 1st of February to tell me that they were going ahead to sell tickets for a 4th and 5th show. Now, I have to admit, I had no idea that there was even a concert coming on, or that 3 had already been sold. I had no idea what issues. I recently appointed as the city manager. I really had no idea what the issues were around, and all I just told him, I said, thank you for telling me. The contrast with the meeting on the 12th is that I was accompanied by Mr. Keogan and by Mr. Downey, who have considerable experience, and they made it clear, when it was raised by Mr. Aiken at that meeting, they made it clear that it would be a very big ask. So that just put those 2 meetings in perspective. To go back then to the issue that arose on the 2nd of July, and we covered this in detail at the last meeting. A decision had not been made, right? I was aware that there was a draft report with a recommendation, and I had phoned Mr. Clark as a matter of courtesy to advise him. And he, having consulted with Mr. Aiken and Mr. Brooks, came back to me and said he wouldn't come for 3 concerts. And I did. I felt that it would be a major loss to the city. And in an effort to see if something could be retrieved, I did indicate that I would be prepared to discuss with the decision maker whether we could grant 4. Now, I indicated at the last meeting that on reflection, I regret making that intervention. But it was certainly motivated by a concern to retrieve the situation and achieve those benefits. A lot of people say I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. It was of no consequence as it happened because they weren't prepared to come for 4 either. And on that basis, I said, well, told the decider, go ahead, make the decision as is.
Yeah. In the context of, say, the level of contact that took place between, say, the various officers of the City Council and the promoters and venue owners, it's fair to say they were of an informal nature, and it was more notification than consultation. There is provision in the existing regulations that allows for, say, a formal meeting to take place if it's agreed between, on the one part, the promoter, and on the other part, the licensing authority. Such meetings are to discuss a proposed license application and a draft event management plan, and without prejudice, which means that we can be frank. However, no such meeting was requested, no such meeting took place. We were notified after the event of the 5 concerts, or certainly after the 3 concerts had been sold. There had been some discussion, informal again, that there might be 2 concerts taking place sometime summer this year. I think it's fair to say from the evidence and discussion we had here during the week that there is a requirement to review the current legislation and the operation of how we carry on the business of licence application because of the very sad consequences for all concerned. But we had to deal with the situation was before us, and we would very much welcome in any review that there would be some consideration given to a mandatory pre-application consultation before it's decided to sell tickets. On the operational side, we have no difficulty with Croke Park from an operational point of view as regards, say, holding events. We have no difficulty with the Gardaí. They are very professional, very experienced in how they carry on their operation and securing public order. And in the context of, say, traffic management, there was an excellent submission in relation to how they were going to deal with, say, the traffic aspects. They were not the issues. They were not the issues that eventually led to the decision that we arrived at. They were referring back to the issue of the accumulated effect of the 5 consecutive concerts.
That was just in terms of the Gardaí.
The issue of the conflict of interest, and I replied to the various issues the last day, and you've come back and asked me to kind of clarify that situation again. I haven't lived in the area for 35 years. I've been, I suppose, for the last, since 2007-8, I've had a delegation to deal with planning matters in Dublin City. And during that time, I have dealt with a number of planning applications directly in relation to Croke Park, and also 3 event licensing applications dealing directly with Croke Park. I think there's a total of 10 applications that directly affected Croke Park. 9 of those applications were a grant of planning permission. One of them was the subject of an additional information request. Inclusive of the Garp Book concert licence applications, we had a total of 3 that I would have been dealing with directly. That was one for, it may have been a Take That concert, and it was the U2 concert back in 2009. You refer to the fact people you grew up with. I'd just like to clarify that. I was referring to... Oh yes, and I just want to kind of clarify that. I referred to the fact that when it was raised the last day, there was a suggestion that it might in some way conflicted with the decision that I endorsed by way of a recommendation from the officer, that there might have been bias. And the point I was trying to make that day was, back in 2009, there was equally a controversial licence application before the City Council for the U2 concerts. It was 3 concerts over 4 nights that was equally as controversial, but the fallout wasn't as anywhere near as severe as the current licence decision. And in the currency of that particular process, there was a public meeting held after the decision was made, which I attended. And the point I was trying to make was that I had the ability to make the decision without necessarily kind of being in any way kind of deemed to be biased. And that's the point I was just making, that I have dealt with these things fair and objectively and impartially, what would be considered having regard to due process procedure. In relation to that, my interest in the property, I am required as an officer of the City Council to declare that and fill out the necessary public declarations, which have all been done and are appropriate. And it's a matter of public record what my interests are in. The previous city manager was aware, or may not have been aware, of my connections to the area, but it wasn't a factor, because any professional decision that's arrived at by the delegated officer in local government is always based on sound recommendation, assessment, report. And whether it's a planning application or whether it's an event licence, there would be...
You had no conflict of interest?
No, I didn't.
I want to deal with the issue of my phone conversation with Mr. McKenna. I've been very upfront, and I say in my submission, I did make a phone call, or returned a phone call to Mr. McKenna early in February 2014. I indicated to Mr. McKenna that I would be supportive of the Garth Brooks concerts.
5 concerts?
Of the 5, yes.
He was looking for 5 at that age.
I would be supportive. The City Council had previously been supportive of special events concerts at Croke Park, and we support special events concerts at other venues across the city because of the benefit to the city. As Chief Executive, I'm always supportive of events which add value to the city. However, and this is important, I gave absolutely no assurance, nor could I have given any assurance at that stage, that all 5 concerts would be licensed, because no event license application had been submitted in respect of the concerts. Mr. McKenna was fully aware of the event licensing process and must have known that any decision on the licence application would have to follow the statutory process and be informed by that process, including any submissions by members of the public, etc., which of course had not been received at that point.
Should you not have assured him day one that it was unlikely, most unlikely, most unlikely?
In a situation where there was a prospect of getting this event over 5 nights. Remember, at this stage, they had sold all the tickets. If I had told them at that stage that they had no prospect of getting the licence, again in advance of the event licensing process, no matter what measures they took, I think they would have said I was completely prejudicial. And I would have felt that if they made enormous efforts with the residents, it might have been possible, it should have been possible, to get a reasonable degree of resident support. As it happened, they were unable to do that. So, I think I would have been in a difficult situation if I said there's no way the city can accommodate such a big event. And I certainly didn't want to rule it out. I wanted to give them the opportunity, right, to try and address the issues. But I gave them no assurance.
You didn't create any doubt in their minds, Had they agreed and did whatever the residents wanted to do, or you would have convinced or not, or otherwise the Dublin City Council, that we should go ahead with this because of the economic benefits to the city or the country or whatever?
Look, I don't know how they interpreted that. I'm quite happy that, yes, I indicate I'd be supportive. I think it's quite an appropriate position for a chief executive, something that's going to bring such significant benefits as that would be broad, would be supportive. But I think it's a far cry to interpret from that broad support any commitment or any assurance that they will get the necessary licence, particularly in advance of that licensing process. And I mean, Croke Park, they've been through this process before. They're not newcomers to it. And they would be aware that there are issues with residents. So the onus was on them to bring that through the process to a successful conclusion.
They didn't do that.
Well, they got 3 concerts, and they managed to convince us to depart from the previous limit we'd imposed. I mean, effectively, there have been 6 concerts have been approved in Croke Park this year. The last limit, the highest number in any previous year was 4. So they went a significant way, but not the full way.
Voted 3 One Direction concerts as the requirement of the regulation stipulates that such a debriefing takes place within 6 weeks. So there's no kind of minimum or maximum time. But it would have been used as a means of kind of informing then the operations associated with the proposed concerts. On the bogus submissions, the information we have to hand from the Gardaí is that of the sample of 200 of all of the submissions that we've referred to them, they've sampled and surveyed and investigated 200. 64% are deemed to be valid. In other words, they're not contaminated, not bogus. 64% of those, right? And they're still continuing with their investigations on that matter, as I understand it. You raised the issue then of the survey that was carried out by the venue owners, a very, very extensive survey of the residential catchment area. And I understand that the results of that survey informed the event management plan, and so as to bring in various mitigation measures that enabled us then at the end of the day to grant permission for the licence for 3. And in the context then of, I would agree with you totally that there should be mandatory pre-application consultation before tickets go on sale. I would agree with you totally on that.
Okay, is there any concluding questions or concluding remarks? Sincerely thank Owen Keegan, Jim Keoghan and John Downey for attending here today. And I suppose just to sum up, the aim of this committee was to establish the chain of events that led to the cancellation of all 5 concerts in Croke Park. I think we have established that. It's also, I suppose, the second thing that we wanted to do was to, I suppose, recognise the fact that there needs to be a process put in place, and it's clearly evident from what we've heard over the last few days that there is a need to establish a process that licences, planning, whatever it may be, whether to grant or not to grant, need to be made in such a way that thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people aren't totally discommoded, whether they're fans, residents, promoters, venues, job seekers, businesses, whatever. I mean, I suppose, summing up, I think, this whole episode has been an unholy mess. It's also clear from the last few days that the evidence that we've heard over the last week, that there is a major conflict between the evidence of the Dublin City Manager, Owen Keegan, and the GA, especially Peter McKenna. Who's right or wrong is not a function of this committee to decide, and it may have to be decided at another forum. As regards residents, I've been contacted by many of them. I've talked to many of them in the last number of days and weeks, and it's clear that there needs to be a more unified voice from the residents. And it's also clear that the GA has work to do in the relationship with them. But I would maintain that there should be one residents group, and I think it would be possible, and I know this was covered in the Mulvey report, to have a more definite ongoing relationship as a result of that. So I'd like to thank you for coming here today, and I now adjourn the meeting. Is that agreed?